Detective Raymond Cole prided himself on being an old-school cop in a city that constantly evolved around him. He had built a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense officer, one who did not shy away from invoking the law in any form he deemed necessary. Yet beneath the veteran's gruff facade lay deep-seated prejudices that had festered over decades, fueled by years of isolation and skewed experiences. The courthouse that warm autumn morning became the setting for a defining moment that would unmask the hidden prejudices of one officer and unveil the unexpected legacy of his lineage. The day began like any other. The courthouse steps were busy with a mix of anxious litigants and intrigued onlookers, while the air pulsed with tension and anticipation. News had spread quickly about a case involving a young black teen named Mark Johnson, who had been wrongfully accused of a petty theft. As Mark's mother shuffled nervously near the courtroom entrance, a small but determined group of community activists and curious spectators gathered, many chanting phrases of justice and solidarity. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, guards remained alert as the proceedings began. Judge Winfred Lawson, known for his meticulous adherence to legal protocol, presided over the case with an expression that was unreadable, if not slightly weary. The trial was meant to be a routine episode, a momentary hiccup in the legal machine. However, fate had other plans for every person present that day. Raymond Cole was on duty in the courtroom, observing every movement with an intensity that bordered on suspicious. His eyes, dark and unyielding, went over Mark with a mixture of disdain and latent hostility. As the trial unfolded, witnesses took the stand, each testimony a thread contributing to the tapestry of allegations. The prosecution built what they believed to be an airtight case, leaning on circumstantial evidences and questionable testimonies. Meanwhile, Mark's defense attorney, a determined and articulate woman named Carla Hernandez, argued passionately for the teen, exposing the inconsistencies and biases rooted deep in the investigation. Carla's voice resonated through the hall, filling each corner with hope and determination. Yet within this heated debate of justice, the tension externalized between the onlookers and the uniformed officers. Detective Cole's gnarled hands, tightly gripping the edge of the bench, were a silent testimony to the rage that had been bubbling within him for far too long. His eyes frequently darted to the black sky visible through the stained glass windows, as if searching for the perfect moment to strike. Finally, as a witness began to recount details from the incident that allegedly led to Mark's arrest, Cole's patience snapped. In a rush of impulsive fury, he reached out, slapping the unsettled teen across the face. The sharp sound of the slap ricocheted off the high ceilings and wrought a collective gasp within the courtroom reminiscent of a scene from an old drama. Mark reeled from the blow, shock instantly painted across his youthful features. His defense attorney stood abruptly, alarm evident in her eyes as she demanded an explanation. But before Cole could utter a final word of justification, the courtroom doors swung open with extraordinary force. In strode David Johnson, Mark's long-estranged father, clad in a sharply pressed suit and bearing the unmistakable aura of authority. However, David Johnson was not only Mark's father, he was also an FBI special agent whose reputation for impartial rigor was known even to those who once doubted his allegiance. The room fell silent as Johnson approached the bench, his calm yet steely gaze meeting that of Cole. For a moment, time itself seemed to slow, every heartbeat echoing in the silence of the stunned courtroom. Johnson's presence was magnetic and compelling, a reminder that justice in some form always prevailed. With quiet but deliberate steps, he closed the gap between himself and his old friend turned colleague, his voice measured and resolute as he addressed the assembled court. "Detective Cole, that was entirely unnecessary," he said, his tone carrying both disappointment and authority. "This court is not a place for personal vendettas or the expression of prejudice." The courtroom erupted into uproar. Mark's supporters surged forward, some in indignation and others in tears as they witnessed the unfolding spectacle. The judge called for silence, yet the murmurs and whispers continued to spread like wildfire. Within these tumultuous moments, the truth began to emerge. Friends and colleagues of Detective Cole, who had long been aware of his troubled history with minor misdemeanors birthed from unchecked bias, now faced the evidence squarely. It was as if the walls themselves were replete with the echoes of unfair judgments that had plagued citizens for years. In an ensuing internal investigation that sent shockwaves throughout the police department, questions abounded regarding Cole's past, his attitudes, and the systemic culture that had allowed such an incident to occur so brazenly before any form of accountability. Meanwhile, in the midst of ordinary proceedings, Marcus Johnson found a supportive arm in his father. For David Johnson, the case was more than just his son's struggle. It was a confrontation with the very prejudices he had long fought to eradicate, even from within the factions he once belonged to. As courtroom procedures resumed, Cole was removed from the proceedings. David Johnson's strong influence and reputation preceded him, sparking a discussion that would eventually transcend the confines of the courthouse. The trial was abruptly postponed, pending a thorough investigation and reassignment of detective duties. Conversations rippled through the restrooms and corridors and beyond as news networks seized upon the story, framing it as a damning indictment of a deeper, more systemic intolerance that had long lurked beneath the veneer of law enforcement. Outside, in a temporary media frenzy assembled on the courthouse steps, voices clashed over the ramifications of the incident. Activists rallied, demanding not only disciplinary action against Cole, but reform of the entire outdated system that allowed prejudice to seep into everyday policing. For Mark, the lash of that slap had become more than an incident of physical violence. It had symbolized a broader struggle, a battle for dignity in the face of an institution that too often devalued the rights of the marginalized. His tear-streaked face was soon broadcast on televised news, becoming the face of a movement determined to demand accountability and systemic change. Back in the corridors of power, Cole sat alone in a stark, little-used interrogation room, the reality of his actions settling slowly around him like a heavy shroud. In that cold silence, his mind replayed the incident repeatedly, the probing question of when his role as a law enforcer became indistinguishable from personal prejudice. His thoughts were jagged and conflicted, a mixture of stubbornness and an awakening, however minuscule, to the impact of his actions. Observing him from a distance was a rookie officer whose eyes were perplexed and saddened by the unfolding of events. This officer, who had once idolized Cole, now struggled with the realization that even the most seasoned officers could be ensnared by the venom of racial bias. At that moment of introspection, the rookie began to record his reflections in a small, battered notebook. He penned notes regarding what he observed, noting the shifting dynamics of power, the vulnerabilities of authority when it tangles with personal prejudice, and ultimately, the undeniable courage of those like David Johnson, who used their positions to stand up for what is right. The rookie's reflections would later become part of an internal report that sparked hard conversations among higher-ranking officers. With each line written in that report, a small seed of introspection took root in the soul of the department, an introspection that, if nurtured, could lead to gradual, meaningful reform. Meanwhile, in the echoing halls of the FBI headquarters, David Johnson was summoned for a briefing. His arrival there was surrounded by solemn, respectful nods and a quiet tension. As an agent who had spent years balancing the tensions between national security and civil liberties, Johnson now faced a seemingly personal battle: how to defend his son and simultaneously fortify the ideals of justice. The incident at the courthouse became a rallying point for investigations into discrimination not only on a local level, but also within the broader scope of federal law enforcement practices. Throughout the week that followed, investigative journalists, civic-minded bloggers, and even prominent civil rights attorneys joined forces to demand transparency. The story of the courtroom incident grew into a powerful narrative, a collision of individual missteps, institutional failure, and the redemptive force of a father's proud legacy that defied the very stereotype that many had assumed was his fate. For every headline that flared with anger and excitement, a counter-narrative began to emerge, emphasizing the need for reconciliation, reform, and the unyielding spirit of community activism. Weeks later, the formal inquiry concluded. Evidence presented showed that Detective Cole's actions were not an isolated act of fanaticism, but part of a long string of similar incidents that had quietly undermined trust in law enforcement. The report was both damning and yet cautiously hopeful, recommending widespread departmental reforms. The crooked corridors of power were forced to be re-examined, as staff were required to attend extensive sensitivity training and mandatory courses in community relations. In the end, Cole faced suspension and a series of administrative actions, while the department vowed to overhaul its processes to avoid further incidents. Yet, even within the rigorous confines of law enforcement bureaucracies, the incident remained a stark and indelible reminder of the ever-present need to face one's inner prejudices. In the aftermath of these changes, Mark Johnson and his family began a long and arduous path toward healing. The sting of the offense, both physical and emotional, lingered long after the slap had faded from immediate memory. For Mark, his experience became a symbol of injustice, bolstering his resolve to speak out against discrimination. Speaking at community events and school assemblies, he championed the cause of equality, urging his peers not to be silenced by the inequities of society. His journey, fraught with painful recollections and hard-won courage, resonated especially with those who had silently suffered similar indignities. One breezy afternoon, as Mark prepared to speak at a peaceful protest held near the courthouse once more, he noticed an unexpected figure in the crowd, a figure who represented not only vindication and authority, but also the promise of systemic change. David Johnson had come once again, this time not as a warrior who had stormed into a courtroom to defend his son, but as a father who had dedicated years to lobbying for the rights of the marginalized within his capacity as an FBI agent. With a solemn nod and a wordless affirmation, David conveyed to Mark that the fight for justice was a continuous process, one that transcended personal vendettas or fleeting moments of retribution. The story of that fateful day in the courthouse found its way into local lore. In barbershops, churches, and community centers, people recounted the events in hushed yet reverent tones, studying every twist and turn of the narrative. The tale of the racist cop's unprovoked assault, juxtaposed with the timely intervention of the FBI father, served as a catalyst for broader reflection on the state of modern law enforcement. It became a shining example of how courage, both restrained and impassioned, could change the course of lives and even alter established institutions. As the months turned into years, the repercussions of that terrible incident continued to ripple through the city. Detective Cole's suspension remained a legacy of his error, casting an enduring shadow over an entire era of policing marked by intolerance and outdated attitudes. Many within the force eventually recognized that true transformation was possible only when those in power confronted the prejudice simmering just beneath the surface. Internally, the police department underwent many changes, appointing new leaders who were chosen precisely because of their empathy and dedication to the ideals of modern justice. The community's voice grew louder, and a new era unfolded with promises of accountability and a deep commitment to bridge the chasm between law enforcement and the populations they served. On a crisp winter evening, several years after the incident, the city organized a commemorative event to honor those who had suffered from injustice and to celebrate the progress made through relentless reform. At the center of the festivities stood Mark, now a young man, delivering a poignant speech to a diverse gathering of citizens, activists, law enforcement officials, and community leaders. His voice, once trembling with shock and pain, had transformed into a powerful instrument of hope and change. Mark spoke with a force that transcended his youth. His words echoed in every heart as he recounted the trials, tribulations, and eventual triumph over a system that had nearly broken him. He reminded everyone that even in moments of darkness, the unwavering commitment to stand for one's rights and dignity would always guide the path forward. As he concluded, the applause that erupted was not merely for the story of survival, but for a future where compassion, accountability, and understanding would prevail over discriminatory practices. In that moment, the entire city recognized the significance of collective memory, of learning from the past to build a more equitable and just society for all. The once tainted institution of law enforcement began to renew its purpose, actively engaging in community outreach and dedicating resources to mend the rift that had so long divided society along racial lines. In a final twist of fate, Detective Cole, now a broken man exiled from the badge he once wore with pride, reached out anonymously to one of his former colleagues. In a letter written with remorse and fading hope, he confessed that the actions of that unforgettable day had forced him to confront a lifetime of prejudiced views deeply entrenched within him. The letter, later verified by multiple witnesses and internal documents, emerged as a bittersweet testament to the possibility of redemption, even if it came too late for some. It served as a somber reminder that while systems can be reformed and institutions restored, the scars left by years of unchecked bias are not always easy to heal. In the annals of the city's history, that fateful courtroom incident came to symbolize more than the conflict between a racist cop and a marginalized teen. It became a clarion call for systemic introspection. It underscored that every individual, regardless of their position or authority, bears a profound responsibility to uphold the intrinsic values of justice and equality. The legacy of that day lived on in national discourse, driving conversations that transcended political affiliations and inspiring reforms across the country. Curriculum in law schools, training in police academies, and even discussions within political arenas began to address the toxic influence of unchecked prejudice, acknowledging that history's mistakes need not be repeated if society learned to embrace the principles of fairness and common humanity. Years later, as the sun set over the rebuilt courthouse where modern murals depicted the struggle for civil rights, Mark stood by one of the commemorative plaques engraved with the names of victims and reformers alike. The plaque read, "In memory of injustice, in celebration of change." With quiet dignity, he placed a single flower at the base, symbolizing the bittersweet amalgamation of pain, resilience, and hope. In that reflective moment, Mark understood that each choice he made, from the day he was struck in that courtroom to the day he stepped forward to become a symbol of transformation, had collectively contributed to altering the course of a misguided era. The echoes of that day resonated in every reform, every conversation in communities, and every determined step taken toward a future free of prejudiced shadows. As life moved inexorably forward, the city itself transformed into a living monument of renewal. Formerly tarnished precinct offices now buzzed with community liaisons and diversity officers. Street murals celebrated cultural unity rather than division. Even former skeptics within the halls of law enforcement began to accept that the true strength of any society is measured by its willingness to reconcile with the past and strive for a better future, all while never forgetting the battles fought to obtain that progress. In every corner, in every whispered dialogue amongst citizens, the lessons of that day were remembered not with animosity, but with a hopeful determination that the future could be different. Even the FBI, represented by David Johnson, carried the invisible yet palpable marks of that day in his daily work. He continued to champion the cause of impartial justice, dedicated to ensuring that no other family had to endure the indignity and heartbreak of watching a loved one victimized by the system. Through interviews on national television and heartfelt congressional testimonies, he outlined the need for compassion within the corridors of power, a message that reverberated throughout his department and beyond. His unwavering commitment to criminal justice reform, combined with an unspoken message to every young person who dared to dream of equity, helped usher in initiatives that celebrated the diversity and dignity of all citizens. At the heart of it all was the story of a young man who had once been the target of unwarranted aggression, a young man who had faced the full force of an unjust system and yet emerged with a spirit unbroken by the weight of discrimination. Mark's journey, marred by a moment of violence, but illuminated by shining examples of paternal courage and community activism, had inflected change that was as enduring as it was transformative. In his continued advocacy for justice and reform, Mark found purpose in a childhood plight, ensuring that every injustice meted out in the name of authority would be met with an equally potent counterforce, a relentless pursuit of fairness and human dignity. In the final analysis, the courthouse, once the scene of a violent injustice, had been transformed into a site of reflection and hope. The narrative of that day, with its turbulence, despair, and unexpected redemption, remained etched in the collective memory of the city. From lonely corridors to vast city squares, the story was told and retold, not for the purpose of blame or retribution, but to serve as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. It reminded everyone that fighting bias and prejudice often comes at a personal cost, yet that cost is ultimately outweighed by the relentless drive for a just society. And so, as the community embarked on yet another era filled with renewed promise and vigorous debate over rights and responsibilities, one fact remained undeniably clear: true change is never instantaneous. It is born of moments, some searing with pain, some soft with compassion, and some electrified with the hope of transformation. The day a racist cop had lashed out in a courtroom, only to be confronted by the unexpected presence of a resolute FBI father, reshaped not only a legal institution, but also the hearts and minds of an entire community. For in the interplay of adversity and courage, of injustice and redemption, a new chapter in the enduring struggle for equality had been indelibly written, a chapter that would forever remind future generations that the quest for justice and dignity must be pursued with tireless, unwavering resolve. In quiet moments of reflection, as the murmurs of a reformed city and the voices of those who once felt silenced joined in a unified chorus, the legacy of that day survived in every hopeful smile, every act of solidarity, and every empowered step forward. Detective Raymond Cole's reckless action, a moment of irresponsibility born from years of unchecked bias, had, paradoxically, sparked a transformative dialogue. It forced law enforcement, community leaders, and even the cautious hearts of everyday citizens to confront the painful truth. Prejudice, when left unchallenged, corrodes the very foundation of justice. Yet confronting it with honest introspection and unwavering courage can lead to the redemption of a society. In the end, the story of that fateful day, etched in the hearts of those who lived it and passed down through generations, served as a clarion call urging everyone to rise above personal grievances and collective suffering, and to work together in forging a future where the sanctity of human rights was revered above all else. With every sunrise and every new dialogue between citizens and those sworn to protect them, that warning echoed, a steadfast reminder that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance and the steadfast belief that justice, like hope, is something that must be earned every day. The legacy of Marcus Johnson and David Johnson shone as brightly as any beacon in the darkness, a testament to the power of forgiveness, redemption, and the unwavering human spirit. Their story, complex and multifaceted as it was, reminded an entire generation that injustice, no matter how deeply rooted, can always be counterbalanced by the strength of unity and the transformative power of love. As the city slowly but surely healed from its old wounds, it vowed to remain ever watchful, forever committed to ensuring that the dark moment when prejudice clashed with authority would serve not as a final verdict, but as a turning point, one that lit the path to a more inclusive, understanding, and better tomorrow. And so, in the bustling streets, the ancient courtrooms, and the hearts of those who had witnessed transformation firsthand, the story of that day endured. A story of tragedy remedied by unexpected courage, of pain transformed into empowerment, and of a community rising up in defiance of oppression to usher in a legacy that celebrated justice at its core. May this tale serve as a reminder that even when darkness seems to prevail, the light of human decency can always shine through, guiding us toward a future defined by fairness, respect, and the unyielding promise of change.